welcome to this video on adapting a personal development program. Before watching this video, I would strongly advise that you watch the video about creating a personal development program, because we're going to talk about today how we might progress that program and how we might make it harder. So today we're going to look at how we might adapt or change a personal development program to make it harder or easier. And for this, today we're going to talk about the principles of training. We're going to look at planning a PDP session, and we're then going to describe the adaptations or changes to make it easier or how it might make it harder. So this is the process that you're going to go through when completing a personal development program. So initially in week 1, we're going to carry out some baseline tests. This could be a bleep test, a PPW, a SCAT test. That could be an initial observation schedule. And we're going to keep this because this is our baseline, and we're going to come back and compare back to this in future. From that test, we're going to look at identifying our strengths and weaknesses, and we're going to try and set some SMART targets for the long term. So we're going to include a time scale and set a long-term target, but also a series of short and medium-term goals. We would then go on to starting to create different sessions, and we're going to start working on our weaknesses through using a number of approaches or types of training. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at what does a training session look like and how can we adapt it or make it harder. The next part of the process would then be to monitor and retest to check to see if the program's working, and then make some further changes and adaptations, and we would then continue on working on our weakness. So just a reminder that we're going to need to take into account the principles of training here when creating our program, but also when we're adapting it. We want our program to be progressive so that it gets harder as our skill level or our level of fitness improves. And today we're going to talk about how we might overload the program, and we're going to take into consideration the frequency, the intensity, and the time which we work for. They are some of the ways in which we can increase the difficulty of our program. Other ways which we could increase the difficulty would be to change the approach. So for example, moving from a repetition drill to a conditioned game. It could be to change your training partner, so to move from one training partner to the other, but we probably don't want to do these things straight away. We probably want to try and use other ways of increasing the difficulty of our sessions. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at why we might make these changes and why we might adapt to PDP. Well, it's really important that we do make changes, because if you do the same thing over and over and over, you're going to get bored. And one of our principles is tedium. So we need to have variety in our program, and we need to try and make sure that it progresses as we get better so that we do not get bored. We need to continuously challenge ourselves as we get better. So as we improve, as our skill level improves or as our fitness level improves, we need to continuously be challenging ourselves to work hard. And if we're not seeing progress, then we need to be able to adapt the program. So if perhaps we're seeing that our performance is plateauing or flatlining and we're maybe burning out, we need to maybe think about how can we make changes to the program to make it easier, so that we start to build that confidence and motivation so that we can improve. And lastly, if we were to suffer an injury during our PDP, we would have to make sure that we can make it reversible, make changes so that we can adjust the program accordingly. So this is the PDP that we're going to look at to start off with. This is a person who's trying to improve their CRE level from 10.1 to 12.1 in 10 weeks' time. They're doing 3 sessions a week, all of which are 45 minutes in total, and the approaches that they're going to be using for that 10-week period are fartlek training and continuous training. So here's what a session may look like, and we're going to show you some different ways in which we could change or adapt that session to make it harder. So to start off with, we're going to complete a short warm-up which involves some running and then some dynamic stretching between 2 cones. So we would want to carry out movements which are short, sharp and explosive, so we can prime our body ready for activity. We would do high knees, heel flicks, some squat jumps, jumping for height, a bit of running, and then some sprinting. And then we would move into our main body of the session. The approach that we're going to use is fartlek training, and we would want to set out a box like I've got on screen here on the AstroTurf, which would be 25 metres by 25 metres. Now remember, when doing fartlek training, we're going to run continuously but at different speeds. So we would start off in the bottom right hand corner of the Astro at the red cone, and with our training partner we would jog towards the yellow cone. When you get to the yellow cone, that tells us that we've got to increase our speed up to a run. to the orange cone. When we get to the orange cone, we're going to sprint as fast as we can down to the blue cone. And from the blue cone, we would then walk back to the red. Now, we would do this for 30 minutes, wearing a heart rate monitor, and we would have our coach or somebody else there to record the distance, so we know how far we've ran and we know how hard we're working, what intensity we're working at if we're in our training zone from wearing a heart rate monitor. And the last part of that session would be to do 5 minutes of walking around the pitch and then doing some stretching at every corner to cool down and prevent us from getting sore muscles the next day. So that's what our initial session looks like. That's a week 1 session. We're now going to look at how would we make this harder. So we're going to think about changing the frequency, the intensity, or the time, remember. Okay, so one way in which we could do this is to do the exact same session, but simply to change the thing that I've highlighted in yellow here, which might be to increase the time. So going from 30 minutes up to 35. That's one example of a change. A second change might be to keep the session at 30 minutes and to remove the walking section. So we would still be jogging in this part here, running from yellow over to orange, and then sprinting from orange to blue. But this time, rather than walking the last section of the square, we might then make that also a jog. So we'll be jogging, running, sprinting. So we're moving slightly faster for 30 minutes, and you're not getting as much recovery time. Another simple change that we could do here would be to increase the size of the box. Now, we don't want to make this drastically bigger. You can see here that I've gone from 25 metres up to 40, and we're still working for 30 minutes. You could have the walking section there, or you could take the walking section out. Just some different examples of how we might make it harder. And lastly, we may also look to try and change the approach or progress the approach. So rather than doing fartlek training, we might now make this continuous. And it could be that we do continuous around the outside of this box, or we simply make it 25 minutes continuous running. If we think about our school, we've got the Larbert Loop where we can run around the outside of the school, and that's exactly 800 metres, and we could use that as our track for continuous training. So there's some examples of how we can take our week 1 session for fitness and adapt it to make it harder. We're now going to look at an example session for skills, and this person's been looking at trying to improve their drop shot. So to start off with, we would do 5 minutes of dynamic stretching around the outside of the court, so a bit of running, a bit of sidestepping, and then we would want to do some series of dynamic stretches, again, high knees, heel flicks, squat jumps, etc. We then probably get into a little bit of shadow practice, so we would start at the front of the court here, we would then chassis to the back and then play an overhead a drop shot motion. We would then move back to the middle and work on our footwork and then work on the technique. Now, we were doing this with a racket in hand and no shuttle. Probably want to do this for around 5 minutes to avoid getting bored. We would then move into some repetition drills, which you can see on screen here. So we would work with a partner on the full court, and the partner would then serve across continuously to the other person, who would start in the middle, move to the back of the court, and then play a drop shot. And we're looking for that low penetrating flight that's going to just land over the net and in between the service line and the net. We would then do this for 10 shuttles, so I would hit 10 shots in a row, let the shuttles land, see where they land, and then I would swap over with my partner, so I would then serve to him, and we would repeat this process for 15 minutes. And the last part of that session might be then to start with a conditioned game. So the game has to start with a high serve, and if the shuttle lands between the service line and the net, it's worth 2 points. So we're trying to play to the front, and then we would do some static stretches to finish off with. So that might be this particular individual's week 1 session. Now, we're going to look at again how we can adapt this, and the easiest way to adapt this particular session to make it harder would be to increase the time and the intensity that we're working for. So rather than doing repetition and just hitting 10 shots in a row, we're now going to up that to maybe 15 or 20 shots in a row. So we're going to increase the difficulty of the drill. Another example could be, like you can see on the picture there, we would add in 2 hoops at the front of the court. So we're now trying to develop the accuracy as well as the correct technique and the consistency of skill. So we're now trying to direct it towards a small target at the front of the net. And another adaptation here might be to look at the structure of the session. So we could remove the repetition drill. We would do a little overhead rally just to help get us warmed up. And then we might move to playing 2 different conditioned games. So the first one we would play, it needs to start with a high serve and then a drop shot return. And after that, we would then play out the point. And we would repeat that sequence regardless of who wins the point. And then we might change the rules again because we're still working on a drop shot, that a drop shot's worth 3 points. And if you make a mistake playing a drop shot, you don't lose a point. So if I was to hit it into the net on my side, or I was to hit it out the court whilst aiming for the front, I'm not going to lose any points or be penalised. So that's just some examples of how we could adapt that skills session. So you may be asked in your exam with making reference to a training session or reference to a PDP to describe any adaptations that you have made. Now, remember, adaptations can be to make the program easier or harder. All of the examples that we've just looked at there are how we might make it harder. And you have to give details about what you did, what you added in, what you removed, or what you increased when making these changes and adaptations. You would also want to tell the person that's reading your answer when you made these changes. So what week of the program was it? And then you might even be asked to give reasons why you made those changes, for example. Just the last part of today's video, we're going to look at how we might adapt a program to make it easier. Well, really, it's going to be the opposite of what we've been saying for how we might make it harder. So, for example, you might choose that in your sessions you get more rest. Now, that could mean that you're getting a longer rest period. It could even be that you're removing a session from the week. So if, for example, I was doing 4 sessions a week of running, fartlek running or continuous training, and I've decided that I'm starting to get tired and burned out and my muscles are sore, I might remove that to 3 sessions a week so that I'm getting 3 good quality sessions rather than 4. It could be that we make the sessions slightly shorter, so maybe if it's 45 minutes and we find that that's too long, we could make it 40 minutes or even 35 minutes, and then look at gradually building the time back up from there as we start to get better. It could be that we make the approaches easier. So, for example, if we were doing repetition, rather than directing it towards a small target or hoop, we might make the target area slightly bigger, or we might not even have a target area. It's just simply a case of getting the shuttle over the net. And lastly, it could be that we're training with someone that's more advanced than us, that's too fit for us. We can't keep up with them and we're getting demotivated. It could be that they're too skilled and actually it's not having a positive impact on our training sessions. So these are examples of how we might make it easier. Now, some things that may cause us to make changes to make it easier is if we're not seeing improvements in our performance, if we're beginning to feel demotivated because the person that we're working with is much better than us, or if we were to get injured. Hope you found this video on adapting and changing a PDP useful. There's more